Hey everyone! Before we dive in, we want to give a big shout out to TACA, the Arts Community Alliance, and Moody Fund for the Arts. This season of Dance Behind the Screen podcast is powered in part by their support. Because of them, you're getting free episodes wherever you listen, full video interviews on YouTube, and our amazing guests receive an artist stipend. If you love what we do and want to support the work, head over to knowvoxdance.com. All right, let's get into it.
No Box Dance presents Dance Behind the Screen, process production, and social media. Don't forget, say no to the box. Dile no a la caja. 고정관념 이란 상자에서 벗어나세요.
Welcome back to Dance Behind the Screen, where dance, technology, and creativity converge. I'm your host, Martheya, and today we're honored to welcome a visionary leader who expertly navigates the intersection of strategy, technology, and storytelling, both in the legal world and beyond. Our guest today is Deborah McMurray, founder and CEO of Content Pilot LLC, a strategy, design, and technology consulting service seeing top law firms worldwide. With a background as a law firm CMO, Chief Marketing Officer, and somebody who has published multiple books, Deborah is recognized as a leader in legal strategy. Beyond her impressive professional portfolio, Deborah is completing her first novel, My 7 Weddings, blending fiction with personal truth. She also serves on 4 nonprofit boards, bringing her leadership and creative insight into the arts community. Deborah, welcome to Dance Behind the Screen podcast. We are thrilled to have you here with us today.
So delighted, Martheya. Thank you so much. I'm tickled to be here.
Wonderful. So we actually met at the TACA Arts Accelerator cohort, which I talk a little bit about in the first episode on this season. No Box Dance has been on this huge journey of really just reimagining our organization, our vision, our mission, our values. And you came and you were a guest speaker for our class.
I did. And it's been an extraordinary way for me as someone who's been in the Dallas community for more than 30 years to meet some of the up and coming and emerging arts groups. Some Arts Accelerator participants are also like a 20-year organization. So it's not just emerging groups, but it was such a treat to have you a part of my accelerator class.
We loved it. And we learned so much from you that's why we wanted to bring you on to our podcast. We knew our listeners would love the knowledge and information you shared, and it was totally applicable to their own journeys, whether it be as an independent artist, solo entrepreneur, or somebody who's managing their own nonprofit or LLC. So I'd love it if we could just kind of dive right in to your experience as a leader in consulting. I'd love to hear more about your background. If you could kind of introduce yourselves to our listeners, and then tell us how you see technology accelerating your journey and what you do.
Yes, I had a very circuitous career because both of my degrees are in music. My graduate degree at University of Michigan, Go Blue, was in flute performance and conducting. And I had a focus on 20th century wind music. So a very different career. Certainly, I didn't take any business courses in school. I certainly didn't take any leadership courses. And my idea of a great leader was whoever the conductor was in front of me that, taught me something combining technique and emotion.
Something that a lot of us artists can relate to. I mean, I have a BFA in dance and an MFA in dance, and you take maybe one class about careers in dance or learning about an elevator pitch, but you don't really get that business acumen when you're studying the performing arts.
So I went on my 25th birthday. I was sobbing my eyes out, and I was still a professional musician, and I recognized I was a morning person. And a career in music, any kind of a professional artist really is most of their career really comes at night, unless you're teaching in some kind of a university setting or something. So I changed and I started work at the March of Dimes, and again, very circuitously, ultimately oil and gas and advertising and PR, and And I ultimately ended up in Dallas as the very first law firm marketing director at a major law firm in the Southwest. So very much a pioneering role. And I didn't really know what I was supposed to do. Nobody really knew what to do with me. So I just, it was all I just focused on my instincts. And I think we underplay the importance of instinct today in today's world. And I think that's a shame, because if we have an opportunity to really hone our instincts better, they will serve us pretty much in any setting that we're in. So that was a great experience for me. Not always, my days were not entirely always happy, but they were always filled with learning.
You're listening to Dance Behind the Screen podcast. Let's explore the future of dance together. I'm curious your advice on just like marketing and PR in general for somebody, like I said, our audience is maybe an independent artist or somebody who's managing their own organization, or they're working as an educator, but they still are wanting to promote and share the work that they're doing. What are some general tips or kind of strategies that you might recommend for our listeners? Like, where do they start? What do they focus on?
Well, I think that the media available to us, social media, websites, generally is where people are, they think that's the avenue because it's cheap, and if not free, it's inexpensive. And that becomes a huge distraction because they focus on the medium and not the message. If artists, a lawyer, a business person can focus on answering the question that I asked you in the Arts Accelerator, who are you? Not what do you do, which is kind of a laundry list of blah, 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 blah. I do all these 45 things, which nobody is going to ever hear. It's just going to be noise. They're not going to understand or hear any of those things. But if you answer the who are you question first, and you were so clear-headed about that, then you can identify the appropriate media to disseminate the message and what that might look like. Should it be a video? Should it be still shots? Should the orientation of the photography be very, very tight, or should it be very expansive? All of those things are after you've already answered the question. And too many people of all ages, it's not people of a certain age, all ages, focus on the whiz-bang delivery mechanism without really locking in their story enough for it to actually drift through the medium.
I have to say that as in the Arts Accelerator, when you ask that question, who are you? And then when, the TACA staff and Suzanne were having further conversations with us, we realized at No Box Dance, we were not being clear about our messaging. And so that's how we were able to identify who are we? We are a dance think tank. And we were able to be very clear with what that is. And we found that now there's a lot less confusion about people just understanding what our company is to begin with, because we're not a traditional dance company that's creating works and presenting them on stage. How do you recommend somebody clearly and concisely organizing who they are in like a visual like website or something like that? Like, how do you think about that, conceptualizing that?
It's very much an information hierarchy. So you literally say, what is the most important thing? The most important thing is we are a dance think tank. Okay. And honestly, that's even more important than your name, because if people are not going to remember your name, even if it has an interesting design like yours does, they're not going to remember your name. They are going to remember think tank because they're going to say to themselves, oh, I haven't heard that before. I wonder what that is. So then in your case, the next most important thing from an information hierarchy standpoint is to define what that means. And why should I care about that? And then from that, again, in the information hierarchy, then you have to pay off any claims you're making. And people, we know this, people make claims, advertisers make claims all the time that they can't prove. Politicians make those same claims, can't prove any of those claims. Proof and payoff is critical to memorability. So if you were saying we're a dance think tank, here's what that means, and you say something like, and I'm making this up, we penetrate schools in ways that get children not just to move, but to think about what they're doing. Let's say, and again, I made that up. So then the next part of the hierarchy would be, okay, you're making that claim. How are you doing that? How are you, okay, so we went into these, 24 schools and this is what we did. And so you're getting more granular into your story, but it's a very logical sweep of information for your viewer and your reader, because they're scanning this, they're not reading, they're scanning this, and all of a sudden, by the end, they have your story kind of down. And I could get excited about it because it's interesting and it's unique and it's well designed. If the design is good that's going along with it, then all of a sudden your reader is going to be able to say, oh my gosh, you've got to go to this website and hear this story. It is, and then all of a sudden you start getting those, not even just advocates, because they're not quite advocates yet, but people who are interested and who like you and like what you're doing. So it's a very clear structure of what's most important, what's next most important, what's third most important, what's fourth most important.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that not enough people really emphasize that. What role do you see emotion playing in this digital communications world we have today? And how do you see that evolving, whether it be like a web page, like we're talking about, a website, or on social media?
Yeah. I was really interested in that question that you posed, and I have thought about it. And sadly, in my opinion, I think digital comms have really taken a very, very distant departure from being very good.
What do you mean by that?
They've gotten worse, and I think emotional resonance has gotten lost.
Mhm.
I think that it's taken a distant backseat to kind of cranking out numbers of headlines and posts as clickbait, and the messaging, and honestly, the posts sound lazy. Part of it, I think, is the laziness, I think, is coming from AI generated content.
Mhm.
There is some belief that more is better when that is not true. Better is better. Make it better. That's much better. And it's going to communicate. I think there is an enormous place for emotion to reemerge, but it takes courage, to sort of open your heart and be truth tellers and to be vulnerable and we know in our personal lives, to have the richest emotional relationships, we have to be vulnerable. And it's absolutely no different in writing. And you can write in a way that is, even for law firms, with all of the sort of legal constraints and the kind of the cultural constraints that major law firms have. That's not to say they can't write with emotion and they can't tell good stories. People just have to work harder and have that be a goal. Emotional connection, I don't think they're thinking of it as a goal.
If, let's say, we wanted to make that a goal, emotional connection through our communications, what would be some, like, maybe 3 quick tips on how to build a strategy around that?
Well, the first thing is, don't start with AI. So don't start with ChatGPT. I use ChatGPT all the time, but I use it as a thesaurus and as, in place of Google usually, because it's so much more concise and I don't get all the garbage around it.
All the ads.
Yeah, it's right. But I think if that is a goal, I think where you have to start is, what is the story that I want to tell?
Mhm.
What is the message? And so let's look, I mean, let's take Dance Think Tank again. That's a very bold claim.
Right.
And because the word think is in it, you could become overly erudite in your treatment of your explanation, for example. Because you think of think tank, what do people do in think tanks? They talk and think.
Mhm.
So,
Which is taking the physical parts out of it, which dance is an
right,
embodied experience. Right.
right is the movement and the magic of mobility.
Mm-hmm.
So, how are you going to make sure that doesn't get lost? You have to really focus. I mean, you have to sort of have to double down on the emotional resonance and have so much courage in reaching out and kind of connecting with someone to bring them back, so now all of a sudden I'm grabbing you and I'm bringing you back in a place where I can get to know you better.
Mm-hmm. Back
And
to the physical.
yeah, right, exactly. And you think of everything we do is physical. Every single thing we do is physical. Whether we're thinking, it's still physical.
Mhm.
And I think there's such an opportunity, and we've lost it. And unfortunately, sort of the overuse of it, it sort of happened to the design world, however many decades ago, when desktop publishing became a thing, and anybody had their laptop and they could create newsletters and logos and do all of these things, and it just was a whole pile of garbage in most cases, terrible communication. And they used it because it was easy, and they thought, oh, I'm a designer now. It would be like the preposterous claim if I say, oh, I'm a dancer now because I don't know, I listen to music on my iPhone.
Mhm.
It's having really, it takes enormous discipline. So it's the combination of courage, discipline, and just being really confident that you can understand what the humanity of your message is and who is really the recipient of your message.
Create, discuss, and advocate for art. No Box Dance.
I'd love to dive a little bit deeper into talking about technology and tools and AI and things like that. I'll talk about my own experience. For a long time, I helped do like publicity and marketing when I was a graduate student. So I self-taught myself the whole Adobe Creative Suite, things like that. And then with the emergence of platforms like Canva, oh my gosh, amazing.
Oh my
Like
gosh.
huge
Yeah.
lifesaver, time saver, money saver, just like an incredible tool. So I'm wondering if there's tools or resources like that you might recommend to our listeners to just help kind of make their lives easier in streamlining their ability to tell stories with their communications.
Well, technology really is an adjunct. It's a companion to the message. So I am always going to say, focus on your message and make sure it is so rock solid and believable and memorable. And then you say, okay, there are dozens of technologies available. Which one is going to be most consistent with the message that I'm trying to convey? If, for example, let's say it's Bombshell or Bruce Wood Dance, for example, either of those two organizations. Once they have their message down and then really understand, okay, what's the best way to communicate about dance? Video. Way better than just still photography. Still photography can get beautiful sort of Ansel Adams, black and white, grayscale kind of yummy images, but it is never going to tell the story of movement like video does. So then you think, okay, I can use this, or I can hire somebody who's a professional who has a different set of tools. And so then you start thinking, okay, money and scale, what's my goal? Am I doing this because I need a series of social media posts? The iPhone is probably fine. I am not an iPhone editor, so I know that there are lots of people who do that and do it well, but it's just not something I ever do. But I think whatever the medium is, and then if there's an arts group that's, visual art, there might be something where it's a video about the creation of the piece. And it could be that kind of storytelling. It's like, this is what moved me to create this and or shape this, if it's a sculpture or whatever it might be. But I think video is the most compelling storytelling thing that you can possibly use. And I would use it on as many social media platforms as you possibly can. Instagram is my favorite. That was one of these kind of flash 4 questions. Instagram is my favorite because there's so much variety. Now, there's so much noise that it's sometimes hard to cut through. You're one of, I don't know, billions of posts probably. So how do you get attention that you really want?
I'd like to ask you that question. I mean, from your experience and expertise, and with in mind, like that the message is really like the essential part of being clear and have a very strong and supported message. How do you create content, or what are you thinking about and advising your clients when they're creating content to cut through all of the noise, whether it be on social media or even just in newsletters? So many people are, subscribed to like hundreds of newsletters. How do you get them to open your newsletter? Like, what's the strategy and the thought process behind standing out?
It's hard. It's really hard. So your message has to be simple. It has to be clear. It has to be something that somebody wants. And by that, I mean, how are you going to grab me in a way that is, I'm a consumer of the arts in Dallas, Fort Worth, and, certainly in places like New York. But what is your organization going to do that's going to actually get my attention? And video, we study a lot of analytics because we build major websites. So the analytics and what we learn from them is critical. And we know, especially related to newsletters, and this was a particular client that was an early adopter of having sort of video segments, and they were informative segments. So they were frankly not beautiful, but they were informative and they were short. And so they would send the e-newsletter out always with a video, and it drove traffic to the website. The videos were always watched because they were a minute, maybe not longer. And that's long by today's standards. Minute video is long. And then they would drive traffic to the website. And what we discovered with a video in the newsletter, it drove 3 times more traffic to the website. It drove 3 times more page views. Interestingly, the number was 3 consistently, and 3 times more following through with a call to action to pick up the phone and actually call a lawyer or email a lawyer or something like that. And so video is, again, well-produced video. It doesn't mean expensively produced. It just is good storytelling video will do so much more if you include it in your newsletter, you link it strategically to certain places on your website, and then you have more like that they can consume once they're actually on the website.
What was in the video? I'm curious. What structure?
It was, just a little box of a video on your e-blast, the e-newsletter that they sent out. And it was very specifically related to legal topics, relevant of stuff happening in the world, and I think that they use it for different service areas in the firm. So there was probably a litigation one, and there was a tax one, and there was, some kind of a regulatory one. They had a huge presence in Washington, D.C. So they were very much in the middle of what was going on in Washington, D.C.
Mm.
So it was very relevant. So what you
That's really
don't,
cool.
yeah, it's really cool. And it is proof. I mean, it is proof that video is good, well-messaged video is going to drive traffic to your website. And
Now
that's
that
ultimately what you want.
Yeah, and now that you're saying that, it feels like we've made such a stupid mistake in the past seasons of our podcast. We pull like little clips in the newsletter, but why aren't we linking the entire, 30-second video, like our teasers that we share on social media? Why are we not putting that video in the
Yeah.
newsletter? So
Right.
watch out. This season, we're going to do it.
Good.
We're already
Yeah.
learning so much. I want to
Yeah.
shift gears a little bit because you do serve on multiple boards. So I'd love for you to first maybe tell us about the different boards that you serve on in your role. And then we can dive in a little deeper.
Sure. I'm excited to talk about my board work. I've been on the Dallas Theater Center board since 2000. And even before they had term limits on the board, I actually did go through a term limit and timed out for a year and then came back on the board. I chair their long range planning committee, co-chair it, and the strategic planning committee. I'm the secretary of the board, so on the executive committee. And then, of course, TACA, I am on the executive committee for that and had the great pleasure of working on the rebrand of TACA and the strategic plan for TACA. The other thing that I spend my time on, I am involved and support other primarily theaters in Dallas, nonprofit, but I'm also I have a huge passion for LGBTQ work and advocacy. So I am on the Resource Center board. 2011, I became a board member and I was the first straight president of that board. And the Resource Center today and I'm still on the board, and I just co-chaired the last 3 years its major fundraiser, which is called Toast to Life. This year was my third time, and I'll still be on the committee, but 3 times was enough to co-chair that. But it was a blast. And then the fourth board I'm on is also an LGBTQ organization. It's sort of a confluence of law and my work and advocacy for the community. It's called Lambda Legal, and it's a national organization that does all of the litigation in the U.S. courts, federal and state courts, for LGBTQ causes, cases that are brought. And we, Lambda Legal, are often bringing these cases in these various jurisdictions if there are human rights violations that we are wanting to defend, all related to the queer communities. So I'm very passionate about those as well, and just so proud to be on those boards.
Well, thank you for your service and supporting such meaningful causes. I think it's so wonderful to hear how you're helping those organizations.
Don't forget to say no to the box.
And I have a few questions related to board experience. And one is for those who maybe have newer nonprofits, just like NoBox, how do you think about getting the right people on your board? What are your thoughts or advice on getting the right people involved in your board?
Sure. It is a very thoughtful process. And anything in life, we tend to ask our friends and the people who already like us because it's easier,
Right.
frankly. Hopefully they'll just say yes. You want certain skill sets that you can rely on, and you want people who are going to be really reliable. And you also want people who understand the financial commitment that's important to running and investing in a nonprofit, especially one that's a young nonprofit. And that's, it's hard. It's always hard asking for money, but it's just a part of it. I heard there is a TACA board member named Gabrielle Kurlander, who's a really marvelous human being. And her partner is a man named Chris Street. And I heard Chris, who is now the CEO of an organization called the All Stars Project, said, we talk about give get. Are you familiar with that? The concept of give get, which means
For our listeners, could you explain it?
Yeah, sure. Get is a term that sadly, I think, has turned out to be kind of a limiting term for nonprofits, because if I am a board member and my quote unquote give get at Resource Center, for example, is $5,000, I think that's a ceiling. My tendency would be that is a ceiling. When Chris said it's really a place to start. Think of the give get as a starting place for your board members to, to frankly give as much as they can give beyond whatever that number is. And I really appreciated that definition of it and the sort of the spirit of that, because it gets, as opposed to sort of okay, I have this assignment, I have to, write check, and give means I write the check, and get means I get someone else to write a check that goes toward my commitment. And I think it's every organization is struggling. Honestly, every arts organization is struggling financially. And I think getting larger boards, I think emerging nonprofits tend to have small boards and everybody kind of does everything, and it's kind of a working board. And I think there's an opportunity to really look at that and say, okay, we want the skill set of these people. We want a strategic planning. We want marketing. We want governance. We maybe, someone who's a lawyer who would be minding the P's and Q's, and certainly a finance person, a CPA or something like that, to help you on the finance side of it. But those people all have jobs, presumably, and full-time jobs. And so if you rely on them too much, it gets to be a lift that's an uncomfortable one for them. And then all of a sudden there's kind of a breach in the relationship. So you just have to really think through. My belief is that many boards are too small and you're relying on the same people to do the same things all the time. And if you could spread that out and even have different skill sets, I think creating a spreadsheet of skills that you need, things that you have to do, and then skills you need, and make a matrix of where are you short and light in something, and then go after that kind of a person. So it should be a very thoughtful process. Okay, over the next 5 years, we're going to need these kinds of people because we want to grow here. We want to do these different kinds of things. And then check in with your board members to see how they're doing. Again, if it's a working board, they're busy and they're doing a lot and they care a lot. But just make sure that as the leader of the organization that you're really checking in with them to make sure they're happy and having fun.
I appreciate you sharing that. And the reason I thought you'd be the perfect person to talk to about this is because you do have so much experience on different types of boards and different types of organizations. And what we've been working really hard at No Box Dance, especially creating this strategic plan, is identifying like what works for us. And we're working really hard to kind of shift how we've been operating in terms of governance. And we are recruiting new board members, and we really want to evolve our governance model. We've been a volunteer-led organization for the past several years. And so now we're at this point where, one, we know who we are and what we're doing, and we have this clear mission, vision, values, and we're all on the same page and aligned. But we really feel like we're at this point to transition into more of a management model and then eventually work towards hiring an executive director, which is very exciting times for us. This is Dance Behind the Screen, where technology, strategy, and creativity collide. You were so involved with the strategic planning for Taka, so I'd love it if you could just kind of give us some tips or insights for how to make sure you actually achieve your strategic plan, and how do you communicate your strategic plan Do you recommend putting it on the website? Do you recommend having it in your newsletter, like taking bits and pieces and putting it on social media? What are your thoughts, I guess, around the transparency of your strategic plan and an effective way to bring everyone in to show them what you're doing and get them? Does that make sense?
It makes complete sense. And I'm a huge fan of transparency. I think the more transparency you have, the better alignment you have with people who are really going to understand you. And you're back, for-profit and nonprofit organizations would spend loads of money designing strategic plans that were in a book or a notebook or something. And it would go on the shelf and nobody would ever look at them. And nobody paid any attention to it. Nobody talked about it. And they wrote really big checks to really good, smart consultants. Those days are gone. And as you know, your strategic plan is on one piece of paper, right? Yeah. So smart. Suzanne Smith is so smart.
It down to that one page. Let me tell you.
Yeah.
Started with
really
like 40 pages.
Yeah. So I love isolating aspects of the strategic plan and, starting with mission, vision, and values. And values to me, and I'll send you a link to the values on our website because we spent a lot of time actually during COVID 2020 really thinking about values and not just the, creative or responsive or words like that, which are a dime a dozen. We really thought about what the attributes were underneath that and what the daily life was going to look like that was going to support a word like responsive. What does that really mean? It's making a claim we're not proving. So I would start with your values, start with your mission and vision, and then your values, and then really identify what does that mean? So what does it mean to me as someone who cares about you, Martheya? I think, and then from there, you can talk about governance and feature. It could be featured on your newsletter and then featured also in these different pieces on your social media so that your story is has sort of a beginning and a middle. You start seeing this story and it's on a continuum. And when you do it that way, then you have the opportunity to keep continuing the continuum and it's growing. And then all of a sudden you're in a management structure and it's like those followers of yours are with you. They've seen the trajectory of what's gotten you over here in this journey and they've been a part of the journey. So take them on a journey and absolutely use your strategic plan as the vehicle to be super transparent because that's how people are going to get to know you.
I love that.
And there's vulnerability in that. Somebody can say, well, that's really not my thing. And you know what? That's okay. You're not going to be everybody's thing. Yeah. They will self-select to be with you or self-select not to be with you. And that is exactly okay.
That's a good reminder for us, especially as we want to achieve such big goals. I do have like a silly question before we kind of wrap the episode, but you talked about it a little bit earlier about sometimes people say, or like you said something like posting content, like people are like using AI to just post basically quantity, right? Like a lot of content. I'm kind of curious your thoughts on the strategy of that. We've done so many different things at NoBox and we're always kind of doing trial and error and see what works, what doesn't work. We've taken a little bit of I wouldn't say a break, but we just have kind of slowed down with what we're posting and trying to be a little bit more intentional with what we're posting. But I'm kind of curious your thoughts on that in regards to social media. Do you think it's important to like post consistently 3 times a week at this certain time and things like that? Or is it more, I guess just like, I'm curious your thoughts on it. We've been doing lots of experimentation and kind of watching what other people have been kind of playing around with. But I'd love to know your thoughts on that.
I think there are certain social media experts who would say it's a very hard and fast rule. You always post on Tuesdays at 10 a.m. and you do those kinds of things. And I think there is a logic around that point of view. But I also think people are paralyzed by that kind of structure. And unfortunately, that's when the quality tends to really devolve. And I think that if you are so clear about, creating very high impact, that everything you do is going to be a high impact, that's a big ask, that every post is going to be high impact and that there's going to be an emotional impact to it. You're going to be posting less. And I would say for high impact, high emotional impact, I would say 1 to 2 times a week, because it's going to take longer. It's going to take you a while to figure out what that rhythm is for those. And I think you're just going to have to be brave to say that it's worth not being insecure that I'm not sort of clickbaiting, and again, we're addicts. I mean, we're so addicted to this sort of hysteria that we've bought into. We've all bought into it. And I think if you step back from that, you're going to be so much more satisfied with what you're producing from a social media standpoint and the followers that you're ultimately attracting, because I think it's going to be a more serious follower.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it just seems like it's just such a challenging time. And especially for, I think, independent artists or those kind of similar to NoBox who are in this like smaller organization startup phase, you already are wearing so many hats. And then the pressure to feel like you need to post every single day or all day, it's just unreasonable.
Right.
And I think like doing this Arts Accelerator program, and I've also been reading a lot of books on technology. I just read The Anxious Generation, which is really interesting about the impacts of the phone really on childhood and even adults and things like that. I think it's just, there's just too many things to worry about. So I'm really grateful for how you've given us some frameworks and guidelines for how we're thinking about communication, because oftentimes it just feels like you need to almost just be like documenting your entire day. Like that pressure feels.
And then you're not running your business.
Well, exactly.
Then
Yes.
people think, okay, she's got too much time on her hands. I don't want to invest in that.
That's a great point. That's a great point. How do you say no to the box and yes to the future of dance?
Ah, golly, how do I say no to the box? Well, I have always been kind of a no box kind of girl, because I've never done anything in a very traditional way. And even the title of my novel is 7 Weddings, and I've actually had 7 weddings. I mean, that's a true story. So I've had 4 husbands, but 7 weddings. So I would say that's very much a no box kind of
Love
approach
it.
to love, I should say. I believe in love. Absolutely believe in love. And gratefully I've found it, but I met him on an airplane. Yeah,
That's
crazy.
awesome. And so
I know, it's a
the
great
book you're
story.
writing is going to be kind of based on your experiences.
It is.
I
Yeah.
can't wait to read it. It sounds amazing.
Yeah. I'm close to being finished with my first draft, but yes to dance. I think I would focus on not on the art form, but on the movement and the storytelling, how mobility and movement is a story in and of itself. And I would start at that very like in your heart, in your body kind of way, as opposed to a script, which is like over here, because that's where you touch people And so I think the yes to dance is really in the movement and in the most kind of foundational aspects of what you do.
Flash 4.
Now we have our rapid fire round, which is our
Okay.
Flash 4. This is where we ask our guests to answer 4 questions in a flash. Are you ready?
Okay. Yes.
If you had to recommend a resource to our audience, what would it be?
I have 2. Adam Grant is an author and a professor and a prolific writer. And he wrote a book. He's written countless books, but my favorite recent book is called Think Again. And it's about knowing what you don't know. We're always paralyzed what we don't know. And some people just stop in their tracks because they're afraid of not knowing enough. For you, I think, especially with No Box, it would be an extraordinary book. The other one from a compassionate leadership standpoint is Gary Burnison, who is the CEO of Korn Ferry, which is this huge global organizational consulting firm. He writes a Sunday blog post every week, and you can sign up for that free. And Adam Grant posts also, always, you can sign up for free. And both of them are just terrific communicators of this day, and they both feel really relevant to me. I read them religiously.
Thank you. What was the first dance you saw?
I thought long and hard about that, and I honestly don't know. I'm embarrassed to admit that to you. I grew up as my mother was a church organist and a concert pianist, and so I grew up around music, and I was also a theater kid. And so that's where I spent all my time, was music and theater. My first career was in music. So I think it was probably in college. So I'm not, I grew up in a small town in Minnesota, so we very little access to that. But I think it was probably something in college that probably wasn't very good.
Do you think social media has a positive influence on the dance world, yes or no?
Yes, because of video and movement, showing movement.
And you kind of said this one a bit earlier, but what's your favorite social media platform?
Instagram.
Deborah, thank you so much for sharing your insights and your stories with us today. Your work really reminds us how important strategy and creativity are deeply intertwined, and how important communications is, and really knowing what's the point. What are you trying to communicate? What's your message? How can our listeners stay connected with you and the work you're doing? And then how do we know when your book is going to come out?
Well, I will absolutely let you know. And I'm I'm public on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. Of course, I'm on LinkedIn. And my website is contentpilot.com.
Amazing.
But I am out and about. So I look forward to seeing you again soon, Martheya.
Well, thank you again, Deborah. Listeners, be sure to check out all the links to everything Deborah mentioned in today's episode in our show notes, including her website. And don't forget to subscribe, share, and leave a review. Until next time, keep pushing boundaries and dancing beyond the screen.
Bye, Martheya.
From No Box Dance, I'm Martheya. Stay curious, stay creative, and keep moving forward.
Thanks for taking your time to tune in to Dance Behind the Screen, a bi-monthly interview series where we go behind the screen to question process, product, and social media. Be sure to follow us on social media at KNOW Box Dance. See you next time, and don't forget to say no to the box.